Michael Harrison only wanted a peaceful garden, but instead the HOA tried to crush his dream with fines and threats. At the center of it all stood Linda Cross, a chairwoman who thrived on humiliating others and bending the neighborhood to her will. Yet hidden in the past was a legal twist that turned her own authority against her. Just wait until you hear the shocking turn this drama took and how justice, in the end, finally prevailed. When Michael Harrison signed the papers for his new home, he thought he had found his own piece of peace. The house wasn't a mansion, but it had something he valued even more: space. A small front yard, a decent backyard, and enough room to finally plant the garden he had always dreamed of. After years of living in cramped apartments with little more than a balcony, Michael was thrilled. He could already see it in his mind. Colorful rows of flowers near the fence, a patch of vegetables for fresh meals, maybe even a couple of young fruit trees that would grow along with him in this new chapter of life. The neighborhood seemed perfect, too. It was quiet, tidy, and filled with families who waved politely when he drove by. On weekends, kids played on the sidewalks, while retirees tended to their lawns. To Michael, it looked like the kind of community where people cared about their homes and respected each other's space. He felt lucky, maybe even blessed, to have found this place. The first weeks passed in a happy blur. Michael spent his evenings unpacking boxes and his mornings planning the layout of his garden. Trips to the local nursery became routine. He carefully picked out seeds, saplings, and flowers, making sure each one had a purpose. Roses for beauty, tomatoes for the table, lavender to bring a touch of calm. He worked with patience and passion, turning bare soil into something alive. Neighbors walking by often slowed down to watch him. Some smiled, some nodded, and a few even commented on how dedicated he seemed. Michael took that as encouragement. He believed his garden would not only bring him joy, but also add charm to the neighborhood. Then, one afternoon, a plain white envelope appeared in his mailbox. At first, Michael assumed it was just another piece of junk mail, but when he opened it, his excitement froze. Inside was a formal letter from the HOA, the Homeowners Association. The words felt cold, almost mechanical, yet their meaning hit like a punch. The letter stated that his unauthorized plantings violated community guidelines. According to them, gardens like his were not permitted in visible areas. It went further, demanding he remove everything within 10 days or face a fine of $500. Michael read the letter twice, then a third time, convinced he must have misunderstood. How could planting flowers and vegetables on his own property be unauthorized? He wasn't building a shed, he wasn't blocking the sidewalk, and he certainly wasn't harming anyone. His garden was nothing more than soil, seeds, and care. Shock quickly turned into confusion. He flipped through the packet of documents he had received when buying the house, trying to recall if anything like this had been mentioned, but nothing prepared him for this. The HOA, an organization he barely even knew existed, was telling him that the land he had purchased, the soil he was nurturing, didn't really belong to him in the way he thought it did. That night, sitting on his porch and staring at the garden he had poured his energy into, Michael felt his excitement drain away. The flowers no longer looked bright. The saplings no longer hopeful. Of all, instead they looked fragile, threatened by a system he didn't yet understand. For the first time since moving in, his new home didn't feel like a dream. It felt like the beginning of a battle he never asked for. Michael arrived at the HOA meeting hoping for reason. He walked into the community clubhouse with his documents tucked neatly under his arm, ready to explain that his garden was within his rights. Maybe, he thought, it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe a calm conversation would solve the issue before it grew into something larger. The room was crowded. Folding chairs lined the walls, and nearly every seat was filled. Neighbors whispered to each other as Michael entered, their eyes flicking toward him and then away again. At the front of the room stood Mrs. Linda Cross, the HOA chairwoman. She was tall, with sharp features and a posture that seemed to demand obedience. Even before she spoke, Michael sensed that this would not be the fair discussion he had imagined. When his turn finally came, Michael cleared his throat and tried to speak with confidence. He explained how he had carefully planned the garden, how it added beauty and value to the neighborhood, and how he had checked that it wasn't breaking any laws. For a brief moment, he believed his words might be heard. Then Linda leaned forward, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Mr. Harrison," she said, dragging out his name as though it carried an unpleasant taste. "This is not a farm. This is a neighborhood of standards. Your wild little project is an eyesore, and it ruins the harmony we've built here." The room erupted in laughter and scattered nods. People who had smiled at Michael on the sidewalk now chuckled along. Unwilling to stand against Linda's authority, some lowered their eyes, but no one spoke up. Michael felt his face burn. It wasn't just disagreement anymore. It was humiliation, staged for everyone to see. Linda wasn't finished. She straightened a stack of papers in front of her, as though sealing the matter with official weight. "You see, HOA rules stand above personal whims. This isn't about what you want. It's about what we require. And if you don't comply, we will pursue this in court." Michael's stomach tightened. He wanted to protest, to shout that this was his property, his land, his right. But the way Linda delivered her words, calm, absolute, final, drained the air from his lungs. The laughter in the room lingered, pressing on him like a weight. As he sat back down, Michael's hands curled into fists. Hatred began to stir inside him. Not the kind that explodes, but the kind that simmers quietly, waiting for the right moment to surface. He saw it now. This wasn't about flowers or vegetables. It wasn't about maintaining order. For Linda, it was about control, about proving that she could bend anyone to her will, no matter how unfair or unreasonable the demand. The meeting ended, and neighbors filed out with casual chatter, leaving Michael alone in his silence. The garden he loved had been mocked, his voice dismissed, his dignity trampled in front of a crowd, but beneath the sting of humiliation, something else grew. A determination darker than disappointment, stronger than fear. Michael didn't know how yet, but one thing had become clear. He could no longer see Linda as just a chairwoman. To him, she had become the symbol of everything he now despised, and that hatred would not fade. Michael couldn't shake the humiliation of that meeting. Linda's words echoed in his mind every time he walked through his garden. The laughter of the neighbors, the smug certainty in her voice. It gnawed at him, but underneath the sting was a spark, a voice telling him that something wasn't right. She had spoken with such finality, as if her rules carried more weight than the law itself. And Michael wasn't the kind of man to accept that without proof. So he began to dig. Late at night, when the house was quiet, he sat at his desk scrolling through public records. Deeds, plats, county filings. Page after page of old documents blurred before his eyes. Most people would have given up, but the anger driving him kept him searching. This wasn't just about a garden anymore. It was about principle, about reclaiming his dignity from someone who believed she could strip it away with a smirk and a signature. Hours turned into days. Michael visited the county clerk's office, his hands brushing across dusty folders that hadn't been touched in years. Each time he opened another file, he felt the weight of history pressing forward. Then, one afternoon, he found it. A set of papers from 2 decades ago, yellowed but still clear. His eyes scanned the page once, then again, his breath quickening. According to the deed, a significant portion of land in the community, including the very plot where the HOA Clubhouse stood, had been transferred to his family long before the HOA ever existed. The boundaries weren't vague or uncertain. The lines on the map cut sharply across the neighborhood, placing the clubhouse, the parking lot, even part of the community garden directly on property his family still owned. Michael froze. The realization sent a rush through him, part disbelief, part triumph, and part fury. Linda had tried to shame him for planting tomatoes in his own yard, but she hadn't even realized that the foundation of her authority rested on land that didn't belong to her. He leaned back in his chair, the papers trembling slightly in his hands. Anger surged inside him, hot and unrelenting. For weeks she had mocked him, paraded his supposed violations in front of the neighbors, and threatened him with court. But now the truth was in his possession, undeniable and irrefutable. Michael's thoughts raced. He imagined Linda standing in the very building that wasn't legally hers, issuing threats, demanding obedience. The irony was almost too much to bear. They wanted to fine him for his garden? Fine. But by that same logic, they had been squatting on his land for years without acknowledgement, without payment, without the faintest idea of their own vulnerability. The more he considered it, the clearer his resolve became. This wasn't just about defending himself anymore. It was about exposing the hypocrisy that had humiliated him. He wouldn't shout or lash out. No, he would bide his time, gather his evidence, and when the moment came, he would turn the tables with a precision Linda could never anticipate. And as he carefully folded the deed back into its folder, one thought pulsed steadily in his mind. They had awakened the wrong man's anger. The next HOA meeting carried a heavy air. Michael felt it before he even walked through the clubhouse doors. The same neighbors who once snickered at his expense sat quietly in their seats, whispering in low voices. At the front of the room, Linda Cross held her usual posture of authority, chin high, eyes sharp, papers stacked neatly as if they were weapons she could wield at will. When Michael entered, her expression hardened. She had been waiting for this. Another chance to put him in his place. "Mr. Harrison," she began, her voice dripping with false courtesy, "I do hope you've reconsidered your garden. Our neighborhood deserves better than a private farmyard spoiling its image." Laughter flickered again around the room, but this time it was uneasy, more nervous than confident. Michael didn't flinch. He walked calmly to the center of the room, holding a slim folder in his hands. For weeks he had imagined this moment, and now it was here. He placed the papers on the table with deliberate care, the sound of the folder snapping open louder than any voice in the room. "I have something to share," he said evenly, his tone measured, not raised. His eyes locked on Linda's, unblinking. "You've spoken of rules, you've spoken of fines, but you seem to have overlooked a small detail." He slid the copies across the table. Linda frowned, then glanced down. Her face, usually so steady in its disdain, faltered as her eyes scanned the documents. A murmur rippled through the crowd as Michael continued. "By the way," he said, his voice cool as steel, "this clubhouse you're sitting in, where you've been holding your meetings, making your decisions, storing your records, it sits on my land. According to the deed, my family has owned this property for over 20 years. So if you want to fine me for planting a few tomatoes, let's start with the rent you owe me for this building." The silence was instant, heavy, and absolute. Not a chair creaked, not a cough interrupted. Every eye turned to Linda, who now sat frozen in her seat, the color draining from her face. For the first time since Michael had moved into the neighborhood, she had no words. One of the neighbors leaned forward, whispering to another. Heads turned, and Michael saw it. The shift. The fear that had kept them silent was gone, replaced by something else. Recognition. Recognition that Linda's power had always been an illusion, and that illusion had just been shattered. The meeting ended quickly, without Linda's usual speeches or scolding remarks. She gathered her papers in silence, avoiding Michael's gaze. Within a week, a formal notice arrived. All fines against him were dropped, and soon after, Linda quietly resigned from her position, her authority dissolving like mist under the morning sun. Michael stood in his garden the following weekend, sunlight warming his face as he watered the soil. Flowers swayed in the breeze, fruit trees stretched upward, and the tomatoes he had fought for ripened on the vine. For the first time in months, he felt peace. A slow smile spread across his face. Justice had come, not with anger, not with shouting, but with truth. And the garden he had dreamed of from the beginning was finally his, free and untouchable.